on the top floor of the glass tower in Chicago, where the city lights stretched like a glittering river. Alexander Vance, a self-made billionaire and chairman of Vance Holdings, sat in contemplation beside a glass of expensive whiskey. At 42, Alexander was the epitome of absolute success. Vast wealth, unshakable power, and a lavish lifestyle that made even the elite envious. But beneath the perfectly tailored suit and flawless exterior was something else. Cold and empty. Today, Alexander hosted a discreet cocktail party for the financial and artistic elite. Champagne overflowed, and hollow toasts echoed through the gold-plated space. He moved through the crowd as if he were the axis around which all orbits revolved, until a familiar voice pulled him back. Still the arrogant Alexander. I remember. Derek Monroe, a college friend and subtle business rival, smirked as he clinked glasses with him at the Marble Bar. Alexander gave a half-smile. Isn't that what everyone hopes? I'll always be? Derek swirled his drink, his gaze sharp as a blade. You have everything except one thing. What's that? Alexander raised an eyebrow, half interested, half guarded. A real challenge. Not a deal. A person. Someone you can't buy. Can't control. Alexander laughed loudly, the sound rippling over the symphonic background. That kind of person doesn't exist. Derek leaned in, voice lower. I bet they do. And if I'm right, I'll invest $50 million in Vance Holdings on the spot. Alexander froze. He was a man who didn't accept loss, a man who lived to prove he was always right. Derek's offer wasn't just a jest. It was a provocation, and pride wouldn't allow him to walk away. What are the terms of the wager? Alexander asked, his eyes already calculating. Derek smiled, as if he'd been waiting a long time. Marry a woman who doesn't belong to your world, someone completely outside your mold of the CEO's wife. 6 months. There are no exit clauses, no revealing the actual reason. Alexander raised an eyebrow slightly. And if I win, you get the $50 million. And once again prove to the world that you never lose. One heartbeat passed in silence. Then Alexander lifted his glass and clinked it with Derek's. Deal. But in that moment, in the deepest recess of a man who had always won something, cracked before he could recognize it. Because this time the wager wasn't on a trading floor. It was his heart. Just hours after the clink of whiskey glasses and the unspoken wager between Alexander and Derek was sealed, Alexander's assistant, Selena Trask, a sharp and discreet woman, received a particular order. Find a woman who met none of Alexander's usual criteria. Not Hollywood beautiful, not from a prestigious background, no flashy social media. Someone who can't be swayed by money. Alexander said, his eyes scanning the city skyline, as if calculating a high-risk acquisition. Selena furrowed her brow slightly, but didn't ask questions. She knew that when Alexander wanted something, he would get it no matter the cost. Within 3 days, a list arrived. Profiles of women with humble backgrounds, working in social sectors, with no ties to finance or the upper class. But only one file made. Alexander paused. Kiara Monroe, 35 years old, black, full-figured, founder of a nonprofit called Transform, which provided housing, education, and job training for residents in Southside Chicago. She had never appeared at any elite event. No flaunting. No easy influence. What caught Alexander's attention most was an attached video clip. Kiara is speaking at a community forum. No script, no theatrics. Just a steady voice, determined eyes, and a confidence that silenced the room. Her Alexander said, a half-smile forming, "She'll be my play." Yum. A meeting was arranged under a community sponsorship opportunity. Alexander called it a humanitarian transaction. But he had no idea that the moment he met Kiara, she wouldn't just shatter every expectation. She would crack the very self-assurance his empire was built upon. The meeting occurred in an old wood-paneled office at Kiara's headquarters, with walls lined with children's drawings and handwritten expense charts. When Alexander entered, it felt like stepping into another world, simple, warm, and entirely unimpressed by wealth. Mr. Vance. Kiara stood, extending a firm hand. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. Didn't think the CEO of Vance Holdings would come all this way to hear us talk about unemployment and free reading rooms. Alexander smiled faintly. I believe small things can lead to big change. It was a hollow line, and she knew it, but Kiara didn't call it out. She let the meeting continue, her demeanor cautious, like a lawyer listening to an opponent's opening argument. When Alexander finally made his proposal, a 6-month marriage contract in exchange for long-term funding for your organization, the room fell utterly still. Kiara didn't get angry. She wasn't even surprised. She just raised an eyebrow. Are you trying to buy an image or buy me? Alexander answered coolly. I want to buy opportunity. She stood and walked a quiet circle around the modest room, her fingers grazing a black and white photo of laughing children. Then he turned and looked him dead in the eye. If I agree, it will be on my terms. No interference with the organization. I have no control over my public image, and every dollar must go exactly where it's needed. Alexander nodded. And if I ever feel exploited, I will walk. No notice. Agreed, Alexander said, feeling for the first time in his life that he was facing a real challenge. Kiara extended her hand. Then let your game begin, Mr. Vance. But what Alexander didn't know was that this woman was the only one he would never be able to beat. 2 weeks after that fateful handshake, a wedding was held swift quiet, and nothing like the glamorous affairs Alexander Vance usually graced on the covers of financial magazines. There was no 1,000-person guest list, no chilled champagne, no media cameras allowed. It was a small ceremony in an old church, lit only by soft candlelight, and heavy with the silence of an unread verdict. Kiara walked in wearing a plain white dress, no stylist, celebrity makeup or bouquet in hand. Her natural curls were tied up neatly, and her eyes were steady and clear. No joy, no romance, only resolve. Alexander, in a tailored Italian tuxedo, stood waiting. But unlike his billion-dollar negotiations today, he held no upper hand. He knew it the moment their eyes met. The officiant read the vows. Alexander responded. First, his voice even and cool, like signing a contract. When it was Kiara's turn, she paused. Then they said, I do, like someone agreeing to a challenge more than a relationship. When the officiant pronounced them legally, husband and wife. Kiara didn't smile. Alexander didn't squeeze her hand. All the eyes in the room, mostly assistants, legal advisors, and a few key investors from Vance Holdings, watched quietly, no one daring to comment. The reception afterward was even more hollow. Alexander played polite host, offering wine, smiling just enough, but constantly glancing toward Kiara, who sat alone at the back table, phone screen lit, as she reviewed blueprints for a vocational training center in Southside. Neither of them ate a single bite of wedding cake. That night, the luxury Bentley drove them back to the penthouse on the 68th floor of Vance Tower. Alexander opened the door, motioning like a gentleman. Kiara stepped in, eyes scanning the marble floors, glass walls, and modern sculptures. The place was perfect, yet cold, like a museum. This room is yours. Alexander gestured toward a fully furnished guest suite. Thank you, Kiara replied curtly, not looking directly at him. She stepped in and closed the door. No extra words, no sighs. Alexander remained in the living room, poured himself a glass of whiskey, but tonight it tasted dull. In the early days of living together, their distance didn't shrink. It widened. They shared a roof, but not a single rhythm. Kiara never ate breakfast at the table. She'd grab a sandwich and leave early for the community center. Alexander would sit with his poached eggs, listening to financial reports from Selena, while watching global markets on a mounted LED screen. But what confused Alexander most was, Kiara didn't need him. I have no gratitude for the massive funding now flowing into Transform. No questions about stock options or benefits. She worked, talked with volunteers, and got enough sleep. One night, Alexander left a small jewelry box on her desk inside. Was the most expensive diamond necklace he'd ever purchased. Kiara opened it, looked at it for a moment, and then wrapped it back up with a sticky note attached. I need a computer lab for the kids, not diamonds. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt rejected. Not because his power wasn't enough, but because it meant nothing. And what he didn't see coming was this. The game he believed he could win with ease was slowly turning on him. Saturday morning. Light rain. Instead of spending the weekend at his usual elite club, Alexander Vance sat on an old wooden bench, the back of his designer suit speckled with mud. Surrounding him was the damp scent of decades-old concrete walls, the laughter of children in the next room, and the clicking of keyboards from volunteers inputting food, assistants' registration data. It all started with a cold remark from Kiara at dinner the night before. If you want to understand me, come to the center 9 sharp, wear sneakers, leave your CEO attitude at home. And he showed up, out of curiosity, out of pride, out of offense, but deeper than that, out of the unfamiliar feeling of not being able to control her, something he had never experienced in all his 43 years. The Transform Center was located in a converted warehouse in Southside, the poorest district in the city. Outside, a vibrant mural covered the wall, bearing the words, "Change doesn't come from above. It starts from the ground." As Alexander stepped inside, he immediately felt out of place. There were no glossy furniture pieces, no innovative climate control systems, only wooden tables, ceiling fans, and real people. Tired eyes that lit up when someone remembered their name. Kiara greeted him in a plain green center t-shirt without a smile. Follow me. There are no privileges here. First task, sorting vegetables. Alexander Vance, a man who once closed a $1 billion deal in 5 minutes, was now pulling wilted greens from plastic bags. Gloved hands, fumbling as he bent over piles of onions. He fumbled stiff and awkward until a 12-year-old boy called him out. "You messed up the bins, mister. That one's for rotten stuff." For the first time, someone didn't fear him. He didn't know whether to be angry or laugh. The entire morning passed in silence and confusion. At noon, Kiara led him to a back classroom where kids were in tutoring sessions. A little girl with frizzy hair held up a math book and looked at him. "Do you know how to solve this?" Alexander looked at the paper, a quadratic equation. He nodded, then sat down for the first time in his life as a tutor, not an executive. When the girl giggled after finally understanding the problem, Alexander was speechless instead of triumph. He felt a quiet lightness, like someone remembering who they were before they got rich. By day's end, after the center had been cleaned and the last child had gone home, Kiara handed him a cup of water, setting it down on a plastic table. "That's my day. Every day." Alexander nodded slightly, sweaty, slightly tired, but silent. "You're better than I thought," he said. Kiara looked him straight in the eye. "It's not that I'm better. It's that you've always looked wrong." That sentence felt like someone had ripped away the gold-rimmed glasses he used to view the world. No more power-tinted lenses, no more profit-colored filters. Just truth, simple, raw, and completely unbuyable. For the first time, he felt small in front of a woman he once thought was just a pawn in a game. And somewhere inside him, without him realizing, a crack had begun to form. That evening, Alexander Vance didn't attend the usual high society gala. He sat alone on the balcony of his penthouse, wearing an old t-shirt, no tie, no red wine. The wind roared across the 60th floor, but he didn't feel free. On the contrary, he felt imprisoned, not by brick walls or iron bars, but by the mask he had worn for decades. And the first crack began to show when he saw Kiara walk in, still wearing her center's t-shirt, hair tied back, arms full of funding applications, as if she never had a paper marriage with a billionaire. "Aren't you going to sleep?" she asked. Alexander looked up, his voice low. "I can't. Tonight. Everything's just running through my head." Kiara set her folders down, crossed her arms, and looked at him. "Is what's running through your head the feeling of powerlessness for the first time?" She wasn't smiling. She wasn't harsh, but her question cut like a knife through the thick armor of pride Alexander always wore. He nodded for the first time without deflecting. "I used to think everything could be controlled, even people." Kiara sat down across from him, the city lights casting a glow on her tired yet defiant face. "You're still controlling things, just the wrong ones." A silence fell. Then Alexander said, as if finally admitting something he never had, not even to himself. "Since I was a kid, I learned to control things because I was afraid of being worthless, afraid I'd be forgotten if I wasn't the winner." Kiara frowned slightly. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him as a puppeteer of others' lives, but as a man, one still carrying wounds that hadn't healed. "Real worth," she said softly, "isn't measured by who remembers your name at a party. It's measured by whether someone thanks you in the rain for a bag of rice that arrived just in time." Alexander said nothing, and then he said something Kiara never expected. "I want to join you handing out food this weekend." She looked up at him skeptical, but noticed something different in his eyes, an expression no longer shimmering with arrogance, but with a genuine hunger to do something right. "If you're doing it just to prove something," she said, "don't come." "No," Alexander replied. "I want to come because for the first time I see a part of myself in those people." Kiara didn't respond, but her gaze softened, not because she fully believed him, but because for the first time, this powerful man had learned to bow his head to listen and to face himself. And in the quiet night of a city that never sleeps, two people once so distant, they were little more than a paper contract, began to see each other truly. Beneath the masks they never thought they'd take off. Saturday morning, a drizzle hung over the suburban neighborhood where the HopeLink Center stood like a sheer layer of mist. Peeling paint, damp-streaked walls, a faded wooden sign. But inside it was the opposite, warm, busy, and full of hope. Alexander Vance stepped down from a sleek black SUV. He wore jeans and a simple turtleneck sweater for the first time and carried a large crate of milk by himself. No bodyguards, no assistants, no paparazzi flashbulbs. A little boy dashed past and bumped into him, almost falling. Alexander crouched down to steady him, not angry. The child stared up at him, startled, and mumbled, "Are you the milk guy?" Alexander nodded, smiling. "Today, I'm the milk guy." That answer made a few nearby volunteers glance at each other in surprise. Kiara stood on the center's steps, arms crossed, watching from a distance. No smile, no words, just observing. Inside, Alexander worked alongside everyone else, labeling food boxes, packing bread into paper bags, wiping down tables, handing out masks. At first, the volunteers looked at him like a VIP trying to play poor. But slowly, their wariness faded, because he didn't give orders. He didn't boast. He kept his head down and worked. One elderly volunteer, Ms. Lucille, who once received rice from HopeLink during the 2020 crisis, touched his shoulder gently and asked, "Are you that billionaire the kids were gossiping about yesterday? Alexander chuckled. I used to be. Now, I'm learning how to be a person first. That afternoon, Kiara brought Alexander to the storage warehouse where they kept surplus supplies. It was a space she rarely brought anyone into, not because it held secrets, but because it was the roughest part of the center. Messy, dimly lit, echoing the poverty she had grown up with. Why do you want to be here? Kiara asked bluntly. Alexander stood among unopened rice bags and dented boxes of noodles, looked around and replied, because this place is real. No mirrors. There is no warm lighting. No facades. Just like you. Kiara froze. He had never called her real before. She stepped forward, resting her hand on an old tin of cookies. Are you doing this out of guilt? Or because you're afraid to lose me? Alexander turned to her. I'm doing it because you made me realize there's a life I've never lived. And maybe for the first time, I want to live it honestly. A faint sound. The fluorescent light flickered. The musty smell thickened in the air. Kiara didn't respond immediately, but instead of walking away, she stepped closer and pulled a list from her pocket. Tomorrow we're handing out blankets to the homeless. Are you going to back out if it rains? Alexander looked at her eyes steady. No rain or cold. I'll be there. When the center closed that night, Alexander didn't return to the penthouse. He stayed in Kiara's old office, a tiny worn-out room, and helped her count inventory. No one mentioned the fake marriage. No one brought up the contract. Amid sacks of sugar and folded cardboard boxes, they began to rebuild, not from the trust, but from labor. From the most genuine thing of all. It rained heavily the next morning. The streets surrounding Hopelink were flooded, the headlights reflecting off the slick black pavement, like a mirror showing the things no one wanted to face. Kiara stood at the center's entrance. Her hood pulled up and a distribution list of blankets was in her hand. Beneath the pouring rain, people experiencing homelessness began to gather, wrapped in torn raincoats and sheets of plastic. They came for the promise of a dry blanket, a piece of bread, a little warmth. Alexander arrived, soaked through. No umbrella, no driver, no commands issued. He carried 2 boxes of blankets, his sweater drenched, face streaked with mud. His designer leather shoes had lost their polished shine. Kiara nodded and handed him a list of distribution zones. The blanket handout took place in silence. Each gift was a moment of contact with real-life bony hands, pleading eyes and trembling thank yous in the cold air. Alexander didn't speak much. Just quietly, handed things out, sometimes with a hand on the shoulder, sometimes with a simple greeting. By the end of the event, a middle-aged man with a tangled beard and wild eyes stood before Alexander and hesitantly asked, You're that billionaire guy from Forbes, right? Alexander paused, then gave a soft smile. I used to be. Today, I hand out blankets. The man gave a hoarse laugh. So, in the end, who's richer? While cleaning the warehouse after the event that afternoon, Kiara pulled Alexander into an old storage room. The door shut behind them, cutting off the sound of the rain into a weighted silence. She looked directly at him. What are you hiding from Alexander? Hesitated. What do you mean? Kiara crossed her arms. I saw the way you looked at people today. It wasn't pity. It was fear, afraid that if you stripped away the suit and lost the money, you'd become one of them. Alexander lowered his head. For the first time, he didn't answer right away. I'm afraid that if you see the real me, selfish, deceitful, stubborn, you'll stop believing in me. Kiara stayed silent. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, old, crumpled, and damp from the rain. It was the wedding contract Alexander had once forced her to sign. I kept this not because I needed a reminder, but to wait and see if you'd ever have the courage to tear it up. Alexander looked at the paper, then slowly took it. Kiara's eyes never left his. He tore the paper in half. In the cold, damp storage room, no excuses, no explanations, only silence. And in that moment, for the first time since the game began, the mask fell off. Kiara didn't attend the HopeLink Center 2 days after the blanket distribution event. No note, no message. Alexander arrived early every morning, helping to sweep leaves, clean the storage room, and serve breakfast to people experiencing homelessness. But the void Kiara left behind was more evident than ever. The looks from the volunteers began to shift, no longer guarded but expectant, waiting for an explanation. On Tuesday afternoon, Kiara returned. Not alone. With her was an older man, graying hair, smoke-dimmed eyes. Clarence Monroe, former director of an independent humanitarian grant organization, and the man who had rejected funding for Rise Up 3 years ago. He was also the one who had publicly declared to the media, "People like Kiara Monroe have no business managing public funds." His arrival startled the staff. Alexander was stunned silent. In the small meeting room, the air felt frozen. Clarence spoke first. "I didn't come to apologize. I came because my daughter forced me to face something I've avoided for too long." Alexander turned to Kiara. Stunned daughter. She nodded, eyes never leaving Clarence. "Yes, Clarence is my father, the man who forbade me from working in nonprofits, the man who laughed when I said I wanted to open a center for the homeless." Clarence continued, his voice thick. "I thought my daughter would give up. But this girl, she's as stubborn as her mother. I was wrong." He pulled out a folder, a personal donation pledge of $3 million under his name. The room fell silent. Alexander asked slowly, "Why the change of heart?" Clarence looked at him, unblinking. "Because I saw the way you looked at my daughter. Not like someone chasing money or chasing a public image, but like a man trying to redeem himself, the only way he knows how." He stood and turned to Kiara. "This money is just a part of it. But the apology, that's still not enough." That night, Alexander sat with Kiara on the center steps, where golden light spilled across the murals the kids had painted last summer. He looked at her for a long while before speaking. "You should have told me that you're Clarence Monroe's daughter." Kiara gave a faint, joyless smile. "Just like you should have told me. I was part of a bet." Silence. Then Alexander said, "I'm not the man I was that day." Kiara nodded. "I know, but I still don't know who you are now." Alexander looked up at the night sky. "Maybe I'm just a man learning how to rebuild everything from the ruins I caused myself." Friday morning. The sun hadn't fully risen when a sleek black Bentley silently pulled up in front of the HopeLink Center. Marcus Whitford stepped out. Midnight blue suit, gold-plated, Hublot watch, eyes cold as a scalpel, ready to dissect a corpse. No one knew why he was there, but everyone could sense one thing clearly. This wasn't a friendly visit, stacking boxes in the food pantry. Alexander heard Marcus waiting in the director's office. He put the crate down, wiped the sweat from his brow, and walked as if stepping into a trench. Inside the small office, Marcus sat with one leg crossed, holding a cappuccino handed to him, awkwardly, by a center assistant. He hadn't taken a sip. As Alexander entered, Marcus smiled. Not a warm smile, the smile of a man holding a knife. "You are doing quite well in your savior role. That volunteer shirt suits you better than I expected." Alexander stayed calm. "You here to talk or to sabotage?" Marcus set the cup down, shaking his head slightly. "I'm here to remind you, the game isn't over. I never bet without a plan B." He pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk, stamped clearly on the cover. Amendment clause. Carter, Enterprises Investment Holdings. In the investment agreement I sent you last year, remember, there's a sub-clause. If you terminate the marriage before 6 months, I gain full rights to transfer the 8% equity stake in Carter Enterprises to my name permanently. Alexander froze. Marcus grinned this time genuinely. You thought you escaped the old world, huh? You can roll in mud, hand out rice, and mop bathroom floors. But I'm still up at the top floor, and I won't let you drag me down with you. Just then the door opened. Kiara entered. No alarm, no surprise. Just cold, calm. I heard you were the one behind the marriage bet. Marcus turned toward her, eyes half wary, half mocking. Pleasure to see you again, Kiara Monroe. I must say, you've changed your taste in men. Kiara didn't react. She placed her phone on the table. Red light blinking. Recording. I just need you to repeat one thing. You, Marcus Whitford, placed a bet on a marriage using another person as an investment tool. Do you confirm? Marcus hesitated for a moment, then chuckled. You think that recording will shame me? Kiara, I'm in financial investment. I don't do guilt. I do lawyers. And I do community, she replied flatly. That evening, the recording was played live during a community meeting hosted by HopeLink. Accompanying it was Kiara's statement. We don't just need funding, we need integrity. And anyone who steps into this center with the intent to manipulate, deceive, or treat people with low incomes as pawns will face this entire community. The whole room rose in applause. Alexander stood behind the curtain, watching Kiara, the woman he once tried to conquer. Now I am teaching him what authentic leadership looks like. That night, the name Marcus Whitford was no longer a symbol of power on Wall Street. It became the hottest topic on Twitter, on evening news broadcasts, and in every boardroom where people once admired him. The hashtag marriage bet scandal exploded like wildfire. The audio recording of Marcus laughing as he confirmed the marriage bet was shared over 1 million times within 24 hours. Numerous nonprofit organizations and investors severed ties with him overnight. At the HopeLink office, Alexander sat alone in the dark. The news was replaying the video, but the sound was muted. Neon light from the building across the street cast a pale glow on his face, no longer bearing the arrogance of a billionaire, but the emptiness of someone who had just lost the most important thing, the trust of the woman he loved. Kiara entered quietly. Alexander stood up, hesitant. I didn't know Marcus embedded that clause in the contract. She raised her hand. Not in anger, only disappointment. Alexander, I don't need you to explain any clause. Please explain why you never told me the truth. Why did you let me sign an agreement you knew was a lie from the start? His voice faltered. Because back then, I didn't think it mattered. I thought you'd never find out. And I hoped it would all just work out somehow. But I was wrong. Kiara walked over to the desk, placed her phone down, and played another recording. It was her voice replaying their first conversation in her office, where Alexander proposed a strategic marriage. You said this was for the community. But in truth, it was for your reputation. I don't blame you for lying to me. I blame you for treating me as a tool. You tried to buy respect with money instead of earning it. Alexander bowed his head, unable to respond. Kiara, everything has changed. I've changed. What you and this center taught me. It's real. I don't want to go back to the man I was. Not to keep you, but to preserve the best part of myself. She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke gently, as if putting a final period on the sentence. That's the only thing you can do now. Live up to the change you've begun, but don't do it for me. Please do it for the people who are counting on you. Do it for yourself. That night, Alexander didn't return to the penthouse. He stayed behind to clean the food pantry, fold blankets for people experiencing homelessness, and move through the night like a shadow. As for Kiara, though her heart was broken, she stood before the center's board and said something that left the entire room silent. I don't know if I can forgive Alexander, but I do know one thing. If a person can change, then hope is real. And we must never reject hope, even when it comes from the place we once despised most. 6 weeks had passed since Kiara left the penthouse. 6 weeks of Alexander Vance living like a man without a title. No assistant, no bodyguard, no pre-made coffee or private chauffeur. Only his hands and time are now wholly dedicated to HopeLink. At the community center, people slowly got used to his presence. At first, there was skepticism. That billionaire is faking it for PR. He'll disappear in 2 weeks. Just another image polishing stunt. But week after week, Alexander kept showing up. Every morning he arrived before the security guard unloading deliveries, mopping bathroom floors, and installing coat hooks in the donation room. He no longer wore suits, no longer sported a Rolex. He was just a simple man, learning how to serve in silence. Once a homeless father shouted at him for handing out supplies too slowly. Alexander didn't react. He bowed his head and kept dividing meals by hand. Another time, a brown-skinned boy asked him, "Are you the rich guy from TV?" Alexander hesitated. "I used to be. Now, I'm just someone trying to do the right thing." The boy giggled, handing him a messy crayon drawing. "I drew you. You're carrying food for people. You look like a superhero." Alexander looked at the drawing, hands trembling slightly. For the first time, he felt truly seen, not for his money, but for his actions. Meanwhile, Kiara watched from a distance. She received regular reports from team leads and saw photos of Alexander standing quietly by the basketball court or helping grade papers in the adult literacy class. She said nothing. She didn't reach out. But every time she saw his name in the reports, something stirred inside her, something she didn't dare call hope. One day, HopeLink held the grand opening of its new vocational training center, formerly an abandoned factory. Alexander had been directly involved in renovating the space, hauling cement and painting every wall by hand. When the MC invited him to speak, he shook his head. "I'm not here to speak, I'm here to listen." Instead, an older woman with silver hair, once evicted from her home by a bank, stepped onto the stage. She looked at Alexander, eyes glistening. "You didn't repurchase my house for me. You built me a bigger one in the heart of this community." Sure. That evening, Kiara appeared unexpectedly. No announcement. No one knew Alexander was folding blankets in the sleeping quarters when he saw her standing in the doorway. She walked up to him and placed an old notebook in front of him, her original HopeLink journal from when she first started. The last page was left blank. "I saved it for something I thought was impossible. Today, I think I might be ready to write that down." Alexander looked up, voice cracking. "You forgive me?" She didn't answer immediately. She just smiled. "I don't forgive the past, but I accept the present, and I want to see if we can write the future in a new chapter." 1 month after their reunion in the old sleeping quarters, Kiara Monroe and Alexander Vance stood together on a makeshift wooden stage in a once-forgotten neighborhood. It wasn't a lavish event. There is no press coverage, no champagne, no studio lights, only hands. Hands that once clung to hope, now holding one another. They didn't speak like politicians. They didn't declare like philanthropists. Alexander stood beside Kiara, gently holding the old notebook she had once given him. He opened it and turned to the final blank page, once a symbol of impossible. In neat handwriting he wrote, "The first day of no longer pretending. The first day of living truthfully for something beyond myself. Alexander." He handed the notebook to Kiara. She looked down at the page, then looked up. She said nothing. She only placed her hand on his, a silent nod to a new journey. A few weeks later, the Carter Foundation was dissolved. The Vance Hope Initiative was born with no individual's name, no glittering logo, only a network of community centers operating independently, yet united by one philosophy. No one gets left behind. Alexander declined the title of director. He became an infrastructure advisor, helping local groups build from the ground up. He lived with no bodyguards and no chauffeured rides. One autumn afternoon, Alexander walked along the red clay path of a new community garden. He paused by a wooden bench where Kiara was teaching a group of teenagers how to write job applications. He sat nearby quietly watching. I didn't interrupt. He just looked at her as if for the first time he truly understood the meaning of love without possession. At the end of the session, when the kids had gone, Kiara sat beside him. No one spoke for a while. Then she turned to him and gently asked, "What if you hadn't accepted the bet that day?" Alexander looked up at the sky tinged with gold. "Then I wouldn't have lost you, but I also would have never had the chance to find myself." Kiara didn't smile. She didn't cry. She nodded, and for the first time, she rested her head lightly on his shoulder. Not out of forgiveness, not because of the past, but because both of them knew from that moment on their journey would no longer be built on what had been. They were no longer the CEO and the social worker, no longer the deceiver and the deceived. They are no longer opposites in a wager. They were two people learning how to build something real. Endings are not always endings. Sometimes they are the first chapter of something new. Not a game, not a contract, but a rebirth, built with action, sustained by trust, and shaped by a love that listens.